All right. So on this episode of Empowering Her, we have special guest Loya Hoyer on. And Laura, I want to thank you so much for coming on here. And why don't we start where kind of what you're doing now and kind of that path that led up to where you are now?
Sure, sure. And let me just say, I'm so glad to be a part of this because I wish I had heard these stories when I was your audience's age.
I appreciate
Um,
that.
so, my current title is Instructional Design Team Lead. But basically, that means that I design training for the company that I work for all of the employees that work there. So any new technology, a new process, a new product that we're selling, I train everybody that works there on what it is, how to do it, and how to do it well.
Okay.
And then the team lead part just means that I'm managing the team. So I've been doing this for about 5 years. Also, I should mention that on the side, I do have my own business and I do
Okay.
career coaching and resume writing. But that all comes back to kind of how I got started. So, my first career right out of college was what I decided probably when I was 6 years old what I wanted to do. And I was a middle school English teacher. I loved teaching. I had only ever wanted to do that. So, I went to school for it. No doubt in my mind, that's what I wanted to do. And then I was a teacher for a couple years, and I realized it wasn't for me, and it wasn't because of the students or anything like that. It was because there was so much involved in it that wasn't what I loved. So like the part that I loved was actually like designing cool lessons and teaching it to my students, which was the whole reason behind getting into education and the main reason why I loved it. But everything else that came into it just made it unbearable for me. And at that point, like I said, I didn't have any examples of what other career options were out there. So I spent 9 months researching every possible career option out there. And that's partly why I do career coaching now. So that way, adults who have this same dilemma can come to me and get some answers like I wish I had. But eventually, I figured out that what I had loved about teaching, I could do in a corporate environment. So that's what I do now. Long story short.
Well, and I think that's pretty common. You're seeing not only teachers kind of wanting to transition, but they call it the Great Resignation, and there's a lot of people looking to transfer into other careers, and we're seeing a
Mhm.
lot of adults that have no clue what's out there.
100%.
They see the mainstream stuff. There's veterinarians and architects and nurses, but they don't see all the potential for like sales and marketing and
Definitely.
what you're doing.
Yeah.
Um,
I have so many people come to me and say, I love doing X. Is there a job where I can do that? And like, it's 2022. The answer is most likely yes.
yes, especially with, and are you working remote?
Yes, I am. I live 5 minutes from the office. So I do go into the office sometimes, but I have enough flexibility to work remotely. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's what well, I don't think anybody would ever say COVID was a good thing, but it created an interesting experience to where companies that didn't think 4 years,
Sorry about that.
okay,
Sorry. Go
would
ahead.
never think about a remote option, and now we're seeing so many things are remote, which is really nice because that opens up. Whereas before,
Definitely.
if I wanted to work for a company, say that is in New York City, I would have to move to New York City. But now I can stay in Oklahoma and work in New York City if I want to.
Exactly. Exactly. And it also like gives you endless job opportunities to apply for. Because, like you said, somebody could be posting looking for a job in Seattle, Washington, and now you have that in your job search when you look for anything by that title because you can work there remotely. And the work that I do, especially like instructional design, it is all computer based. I'm designing e learning for people, so like stuff that you click through on your own,
Mhm.
or I design self paced training or live training
Right.
where I basically design a lesson plan and I give it to somebody else to train. So like as long as I have an internet connection and a laptop, I can work anywhere.
Okay, so let's talk about that kind of that path. If somebody's watching this and they're like, "What a cool job! I think I want to do that."
It is cool.
Would they need a college education, or is it something that can be done through like boot camps or online learning?
So I would recommend getting at least a bachelor's degree. I would even argue that you could probably get an associate's degree.
Mhm.
But I since since I've been doing this for a while and since I've coached a lot of teachers on like instructional design, I would say getting some sort of background in education or something closely related to that is incredibly helpful because that's what makes me good at my job is I understand how your brain works in a way that you're going to learn from something that I put in front of you. So some sort of background in education, but aside from that basic degree, if you will, like a bachelor's or even an associate's, you really just need an excellent portfolio,
Okay.
which has examples of your work that's really awesome and impressive. So for me, when I transitioned out of teaching, I could use a lot of teaching materials and present that to show that I know how your brain works and I can teach you. Um, but if you even if you have a bachelor's or an associate's, if you find a way to like make really awesome training on your own and put it in a portfolio or even do freelance work or something, then no, it's not necessarily that you get like higher levels of education than that.
So I like that because you mentioned freelance, and so with your role, you actually have the ability to kind of work for yourself, or to work for a company. Because I know sometimes there's the security of I'm going to get a steady salary, and I
Mhm.
is nice, but then we also have people that are have that entrepreneurial spirit, and they don't mind going and digging deep and going and marketing themselves.
For sure.
So let me ask this then. For somebody that likes the instructional design aspect and they want to freelance, how have you found best ways to market yourself?
That's a great question. Um, I will say first, a great way to just network and market in general is using LinkedIn. There are so many people on there, and you can connect with people and just say like build a connection with somebody. Like, hey, we went to the same school, and then like start a connection that way. And so many awesome things can come from that. Like, I've been on podcasts because of connections I've made on LinkedIn. I'm doing this because of LinkedIn. So
Right.
like definitely recommend going that route and just making connections because you never know what could happen later on. Then, in addition to working on your portfolio, it would be a good idea to reach out to organizations and ask if they have training needs or if they need help with creating awesome training. And then you can say, like, look, these are examples of work that I've done in the past. And a good way to kind of start that ball rolling is to ask a nonprofit or a charity
Okay.
because they're usually the ones that can't afford to hire somebody to do training. So
I
they usually need people to be trained on something.
Yeah, and that is such a good recommendation because I think the nonprofits are often they kind of get skipped in the process, especially
Definitely.
if you're looking just to kind of build up your portfolio, get that experience, and I think because they don't have that, they are begging for help, which is unfortunate, but I think it's a great place for people to get started.
Totally agree. Yeah.
So as far as one question the kids always want to know: how much do they make? So, and I know that instructional design it can and let's just take it from the point that you're working for a company. I know it can depend on
Sure.
if you're ed tech or corporate startup, established, but let's just what would that entry level up to that leadership position? What would an average salary look like?
I'm glad you asked average because, like you said, it does vary a lot depending on location, too. Even if you work remotely, usually your salary is based on where you live.
Okay.
So, like, if I was working for a company that was based in New York City, where cost of living is very high, but I lived in the middle of nowhere, Idaho, they probably wouldn't offer me the New York City salary. You can try to negotiate it, but they probably wouldn't offer you right that upfront. But I have done a lot of research on this, and the nationwide average starting salary for an instructional designer is about 75,000 to about 85,000, again, depending on your location. But for somebody coming from the teaching world, that was double what I was making as a
Yeah.
teacher.
Yes.
So it's all relative, really.
Yeah, and then I didn't realize that sometimes teaching salaries can be all over the place too,
Oh, for sure.
because I'm here in well there's a debate whether Oklahoma's the South or not, but so I always say we're in the South, but
It's the South.
my salaries are pretty average with what's around here, which is not real high. But then I was talking to a colleague out, and they live in Washington D.C. and they're hitting six figures, and I was like,
Mm-hmm.
what? You're getting paid six figures to teach? That's
Yeah.
crazy. So yeah, it's insane.
It is. And I remember that too. When I was interviewing for my very first teaching job outside of like when I was graduating, I went to this little teeny tiny town in North Carolina, and it was beautiful, and I like checked out the town and everything, and they said, we're pleased to be able to offer you a salary of $31,000, and that includes your benefits and everything. And to me, I had no frame of reference even after college. I was like, $31,000 is so much money. And then I sat down with my dad and we like budgeted it all out, and it was like, wow, that really doesn't get you far at all.
Yeah.
So again, it's all relative. That area that I was being recruited into was a very low cost of living area. But while housing might have been inexpensive, gas was still the same price, food was the same price, and then I was going to be 9 hours away from my family. So anytime I was driving home and back, I had to consider that. So, yeah, when I moved elsewhere, I did get a higher salary than that, but it still wasn't very much. So even if, let's say, like you decide to move to San Francisco and somebody's offering you $100,000 a year, that sounds amazing, but like do the budgeting to figure out if it's really worth it or if you're going to be putting yourself in a financial bind.
Yeah, and I had a similar experience, when I got my first teaching contract, and they, this was before they bumped it up, before there was the walkout.
Mm-hmm.
The contract was like 33.5, and I was like, that is so much money. Oh my god! And then I got my first check, and I was like, I think I need a second job. But
Yeah, this is
so
no
it's just
money. Yeah.
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 Um, and then, and that's a great point that you bring up about, sometimes salaries don't go nearly as far as, there was a friend of mine lives out in California, and she was saying, well, you should come over here and teach. And I was like, okay, just out of curiosity, what, for your district, what would my salary look like? And she said, oh, you'd be at like 71. And I'm like, what's your mortgage look like? And she's like, well, you could get a roommate or two. And I'm like, well,
Yeah.
I was like, I don't,
Yeah.
that's not the point. Golly.
Exactly. Exactly. For sure.
So if somebody wanted, we kind of glossed over this a little bit, but if somebody was really like, I want to be where Laura is right now, um, what would that, and they didn't want to take a lot of detours, they kind of wanted that straight path. What might that straight path look like coming out of high school?
That's such a good question because when I was a teacher, right, I didn't think anybody really changed careers.
Right.
I didn't. All of the examples in my life and all the teachers I had ever known, just they got one job right out of college and they stayed there forever. Or they might have moved places, but they did the same work.
Right.
Um, but most, if not all of the instructional designers I know, it's their second career.
Mhm.
So it's not usually the path that people immediately go into, which was also why I wanted to do this, is to let you know that like this is an option and you don't have to do it as a second career. But I would recommend, like I said, getting some sort of background in education and how the brain works. And that could also be like psychology related. I would emphasize specifically something around education because psychology is very, very broad.
Right.
But like learning how the brain works and how it influences how we learn, I think is foundational to being able to be a successful instructional designer. So then right out of college, I would pursue some sort of education around that. And then I would honestly start applying, start working on your portfolio, work for nonprofits, maybe start doing freelance work if you want to, but then start applying for those jobs. Just keep in mind, I mean, as of right now, like I said, a lot of people this is their second career. So they're usually coming into it with a lot of portfolio experience or a lot of very specific experience in like education or business or something. So just be prepared to be able to show your worth with your portfolio. And I think you'll do fine.
Gotcha. Um, so let's talk about demand versus opportunity within instructional design, because I know that, like, growing up, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a marine biologist, and then when I started looking at like the growth for that career field, it's like there are a lot of unemployed marine biologists out there.
Oh,
Uh,
that's so
so
sad.
what
You need them.
I know. Well, and I think I was fueled by watching videos of Jacques Cousteau. I was like, oh, I want to ride on a boat and play with whales, which is what a lot of them are not doing. But And I think there are seems to be a lot of teachers that are wanting to go into instructional design. So
Mhm.
and I'm pretty sure that for every company, whether it's a startup or corporate or wherever it may be, they probably at least have one instructional designer on staff.
Yep.
So is instructional design itself, is it one of those career fields that is going to continue to grow, and is there a lot of competition in the field itself?
So yes to both, but I think that that's a good thing, honestly. So I see instructional design growing very much into the e-learning space.
Mhm.
So less so face-to-face interaction, because now that we're hiring people remotely, you can't always do a face-to-face training.
Right.
And even if you do it face-to-face, it's not the same as being in the classroom. Just like you guys learned last year with, and the year before with virtual learning, where it's like it's not the same as being in the classroom. So while right now I also design training for in person, that piece is very rare right now. And I think it's going to go away. And I think it's all going to come back to being e learning or like virtual facilitation. But I do think that there's absolutely opportunity for growth, because traditionally in the past, like instructional design has grown a lot, even over the last 5 years, because more people have seen the value in having somebody else design training. So up until like even 10 years ago, it used to be if a manager saw that their team needed training, the manager had to take the time in addition to what they were doing to figure out how to train somebody, and it usually wasn't very effective. So instructional designers, especially in the last 5 years, have really proven their value to a business by showing that we give that time back to the managers. Somebody who's an expert on it comes in and designs the training, and it's more likely to get results. So I definitely think it's not going away. I think it's going to grow, but directly into that e-learning space and like gamification and all of that stuff I'm really excited about. But there is also a lot of competition for it right now. To your point, a lot of teachers are really trying to get into it. But as a career coach too, I always tell people you are unique and you have a very unique background. And just because somebody else has applied for something, that shouldn't discourage you from applying as well. Because you, especially if you can articulate what you specifically bring to the table, then there's no harm in, at the very least, applying for something.
I love that. I love that. Because I think, there's kind of a disconnect between when we look at a job posting and what they're actually hiring for.
Oh, for
And
sure.
because there'll be all these requirements, and then they hire people that don't necessarily meet those particular requirements. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
what are some common programs? Like I've heard there's Articulate and like Adobe Illustrator. What are maybe the top 3 or 4 programs that you would recommend somebody get
Sure.
proficient on?
Sure. So Articulate 360 is definitely one of them. And Articulate 360 is saying the words Articulate 360 is like saying Microsoft Office. It includes
Okay.
multiple programs within it.
Okay.
So the two main programs are Storyline and Rise. And Storyline is like a really interactive PowerPoint. You can take PowerPoint and put it in there and then add buttons, add questions, add quizzes, make it a game, whatever you want to do. And then Rise is more of an easy course builder, where you just say, like, I want a text block here, I want a question here, and it's already kind of coded for you. Um, those two are the main ones that almost every single job posting is looking for right now. But I would also argue that being able to record and edit audio and video is also a really helpful tool, because there are times when you have to like demonstrate something. And I don't always have a voiceover artist.
Yeah.
In fact, I never have a voiceover artist. I usually have to voice it over myself. So by learning programs like Camtasia, which is video editing software, and Audacity, which is a free audio editing software,
Okay.
um, you can showcase your skills in putting together videos as well, which makes you even more marketable. And I'm really glad you brought up your other point at the beginning of what you just said, where you were talking about job descriptions.
Yes.
So I just really quick want to throw out there, like from a hiring manager's perspective. So my team right now is a little small. We have a large demand for training materials.
Mhm.
So right now there's 4 people on my team, including me. and I was recently promoted into this role. So since I was promoted, but my position hasn't been filled yet, my old position, I'm doing the work of two people right now, full
Okay.
time. Like not even like, oh, I'm doing my work and a little bit extra. It's like I'm working two full-time jobs. That's a lot.
Well, that's fun. Are you
Yeah,
getting are you getting two salaries?
no,
Of course not.
I did get a raise, but it's not two salaries. Trust me. Um, but there are three other people on my team, and one of those people, his wife's about to have a baby, so he's about to go on paternity leave. So then I'm going to be down to two other people on my team,
Wow.
and we are in the process of requesting this job be posted so that we can start interviewing, so that we can hire somebody, which will at the very least take at least a month to get somebody. So it hasn't been approved to be posted yet. So in the meantime, I'll be doing the work of three people. So like the job description is going to say things like somebody who's familiar with Articulate 360, somebody who has experience with instructional design, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm really looking for, when I'm interviewing people, who's going to take work off of my plate instead of add to it. So like, yes, the job description is things that I'm looking for, but it's also things like, are you going to get along with my team members?
Mhm.
Are you going to be able to jump in and hit the ground running? Can I give you projects right off the bat that you can take and do without too much of my help? And things like that. So I just want to throw that out there as something to keep in mind as you go to enter the workforce. Is most of the time when people are looking at you or interviewing you, they're asking themselves, are you going to add to my plate or take things off my plate?
That's fantastic. So I may have to call you again when I start doing the interview series for my
Absolutely.
students. Okay, so here is the hot seat question for you.
Sure.
Knowing what you know now, and this doesn't have to be career, profession, or education related, but knowing what you know now, if you could give a piece of advice to yourself when you were in middle school, high school, what would that be?
Oh, this is such a good question. There are so many things I would love to give myself advice on, but the main thing would be this: it's okay to change your mind.
Okay.
It's okay to change your mind when it comes to careers, when it comes to friends, when it comes to significant others, when it comes to anything in life. When you get enough information that you feel like, my original decision isn't what I agree with anymore, you can change your mind. So, like I mentioned earlier, when I was in school and everything, I was dedicated to being a teacher. And in full transparency, when I had the thought that I didn't want to teach, I had a full breakdown, because in my mind, that was the one thing I was super sure of. And then having that idea and finally realizing that that's not what I wanted, like totally rocked my world. And it was really hard to get through that for a while. But then once I realized that it's okay to change your mind and that you can change careers multiple times. You can live in different places, you can date different people. Like it across the board. It's okay to change your mind.
I
Always.
like that. I like that. Because I think sometimes we get our identity wrapped up in our
Absolutely.
occupation. Because if somebody asks you, like, hey, tell me about yourself, like the first thing usually, so I'm
I'm a
a,
teacher.
and then you talk about your career.
Yep.
So there tends to be kind of that, almost that, especially if you're in a career that you think that that's what you were meant to be, it's almost like you can kind of lose a piece of yourself until you
Absolutely.
realize, like, okay, this is not the end of the world.
Absolutely. And it took me a very long time to realize it. But once I figured out my why, if you will, like what drives me to do the work that I do every day, that was such a freeing moment. I figured out that my why is sharing what I know with other people to make their lives better somehow. Like that's the things that I seek out. That's why I wanted to teach. That's why I'm an instructional designer now. That's why I started career coaching on the side, because I wanted to continue help people and sharing what I know. But like it's also freeing because I know that if all of these things were to go away, if they are no longer options, there are other careers that I could pursue that would meet my why.
That is beautiful. The why. I like it. Well, Laura, I just can't thank you enough for coming on here and just sharing your wisdom, your experience, your knowledge with everybody and with
Thank you.
me. And I wish you the best, and you have a great day.
Thank you. You too.